Once upon a time, in a small, beautiful town, there lived a woman named Nika, but popularly called Mama Nika. Mama Nika had carried her baby in her belly longer than anyone had ever seen. 12 full moons and still no cry of a child. The villagers shook their heads in wonder. This is not normal, they whispered. Even elephants don't wait that long. Then, one bright morning, the sun danced on the rooftops and Mama Nika screamed. Her labor had begun. People dropped their farming tools and cooking pots, rushing to her small hut. The air buzzed with excitement and fear. Inside the hut, the midwife worked hard, her hands trembling as sweat dripped from her forehead. The baby was coming, but something felt different, something strange. The villagers stood outside, their hearts pounding like the drums at the village square. Finally, the door creaked open, and the midwife stepped out. Her face was pale as if she had seen a spirit. Her voice shook as she whispered, "It's a girl, but she has two heads." The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths, others their eyes. Two heads? What kind of child is this? They murmured. Curiosity burned in their hearts, and they pushed closer to the hut. When the baby was brought out, the crowd froze. One head was fair, like the golden sand by the river. The other was dark, like the shadow under the tall Iroko tree. The people stared, their mouths open. Some shook their heads, muttering, "This is not a child. This is a curse." Others smiled and said, "No, this is a blessing. Two heads must mean double wisdom." Mama Nika looked at her baby, her eyes soft with love. She didn't care about curses or blessings. "My child is special," she said, holding the baby close. The villagers argued as they stood outside her hut. "What do we call this? Twins or one child?" someone asked. But before anyone could answer, an elder with a long white beard raised his hand. "Let the heads have names," he said. "The fair one shall be called Udo for peace. The dark one shall be called Ugo for strength." And so the baby with two heads was named Udo and Ugo. The villagers returned to their homes, whispering stories of what they had seen. Some said the baby was a gift from the gods. Others believed Mama Neka must have done something wrong to bring such a strange child into the world. Udo and Ugo grew fast, like yam vines after the first rain. Mama Neka would shake her head, laughing. These two heads share one stomach. They cry together, eat together, and even sleep at the same time. As they grew older, Udo and Ugo amazed everyone in the village. They didn't just walk early, they ran. They didn't just talk, they spoke in ways that made people stop and listen. By the time they started school, it was clear they were different in more ways than one. In the classroom, they always knew the answers. "No wonder they're the best in class. They have two heads." The other children would laugh. The teacher was proud, saying, "Udo and Ugo are a blessing to this village. They will make us proud someday." But little did they know, even two heads don't always think the same way. Udo loved rice, the way the grain smelled when they were cooked just right. Ugo, on the other hand, craved beans, especially with spicy stew. At the dining table, they would argue like cocks in a fight. "Rice is better," Udo would insist, her fair head turning slightly. "No, beans are better," Ugo would argue back, her dark head shaking. Mama Neka would laugh and say, "You two, settle down. Rice today, beans tomorrow." It wasn't just food. They liked different colors too. Udo's eyes lit up when she saw a bright yellow dress. "This one is perfect," she'd say, but Ugo's lips would twist in disagreement. "No, the red one is better," she'd argue. Despite their little quarrels, Udo and Ugo always found a way to compromise. "Fine," Udo would say. Let's take the yellow dress today and the red one next time. The villagers loved them, watching in amazement as they played and studied. Two heads, one body, they would say. Even if they fight, they have no choice but to get along. The sisters grew stronger each day, their bond like the roots of a baobab tree, impossible to break. Though they were different, they were always together, and the village grew used to their unique ways. As Udo and Ugo grew into beautiful women, their laughter softened, their steps became graceful, and their eyes shone with wisdom. The villagers marveled at how they had blossomed. But when it came to marriage, the men hesitated. How can you marry two heads? They whispered among themselves. It's like having two wives in one body. The sisters heard the whispers, but kept their heads high. Mama Nika consoled them, saying, "The right man will come. Be patient, my daughters." Finally, 3 men showed interest in marrying them, one after the other. But that's when the real trouble began, because none of the men could please them. First came Chike. He was tall, bold, and as confident as the roaring river after a storm. His laughter was loud, his voice deep, and his presence filled every room he entered. Ugo's dark eyes sparkled the first time she saw him. "He's the one," Ugo whispered. "He's strong, handsome, and fearless." But Udo wasn't convinced. "He's too loud," she said, frowning. "I don't think I like him." Ugo wouldn't hear it. "Give him a chance. He's perfect for us," she insisted, her excitement as bright as a midday sun. Reluctantly, Udo agreed. Chike courted them with gifts of sweet palm wine and stories of his bravery. Ugo's heart grew fonder with each visit, while Udo watched him with wary eyes. The wedding was grand, with drummers, dancers, and food spread across the village square. The elders blessed the union, and the villagers cheered. Mama Nika smiled through her tears, saying, "May this marriage bring joy to my daughters." At first, everything seemed fine. Chike's boldness made Ugo laugh, and his strength made her feel safe. But Udo couldn't stand him. She found his voice too loud, his laughter too sharp. "He doesn't care about what I want," Udo complained. "He's always listening to Ugo." Chike tried his best to please them both, but no matter what he did, Udo wasn't happy. She argued with him at every turn. "I can't live like this," Udo finally said one night. "I don't like him, Ugo. Why should I be stuck with someone I don't want?" The fights grew louder, like a storm that wouldn't end. Chike grew weary. "How can I please both of you at the same time?" he shouted one evening. After just a year, the marriage crumbled, like a clay pot dropped from a height. Chike walked away, his head bowed in defeat. The villagers shook their heads in disappointment. "We knew this would happen," they said. "Two heads, one body. It's a curse." But Udo and Ugo didn't listen. They returned to their mother's hut, their hearts heavy but determined. Ugo whispered to Udo, "Maybe the next man will be better." And with that hope, they waited. Not long after Chike left, another suitor stepped forward. His name was Kelechi. Unlike Chike, Kelechi was calm, with a voice as soft as the morning breeze and a heart as kind as the gentle rain. Udo's fair face lit up the first time she saw him. "He's perfect," she said, her voice soft with admiration. "He listens, he understands. He's nothing like Chike." But Ugo wasn't convinced. "He's too quiet," she said, frowning. "How can a man so silent protect us? He's boring." Udo wouldn't hear any complaints. "We need peace, Ugo," she insisted. "Kelechi will bring us that." With Udo leading the way, they agreed to marry Kelechi. The wedding was smaller this time, quieter, just like Kelechi himself. Mama Nika blessed them with a cautious smile, hoping this union would last. At first, everything seemed perfect. Kelechi brought calmness to their lives. He spoke softly, cooked meals with them, and even helped with little chores around the house. Udo blossomed in his care. She would laugh softly and say, "Kelechi makes me feel whole." But Ugo felt left out. Kelechi's gentleness didn't touch her the same way. "He doesn't even talk to me," she complained to Udo. "He only cares about you." "You're imagining things," Udo replied, brushing her off. "Kelechi is kind to both of us." But Ugo's unhappiness grew. She began to sulk during meals, snapping at Udo over small things. The sisters argued more and more, their voices rising like clashing cymbals. Kelechi tried his best to mediate. "Please, can we not fight?" he would say, his voice pleading. But no matter how much he tried, the peace he brought slowly cracked under the weight of their quarrels. "I can't take this anymore," Kelechi finally said one evening, his voice heavy with sadness. "I wanted to make you happy, but I can't. This marriage isn't working." After 2 years, Kelechi walked away, leaving Udo and Ugo behind. The villagers shook their heads, their whispers growing louder. "They're cursed," some said. "No man can handle them." Mama Nika comforted her daughters, her hands gentle on their backs. "Sometimes love takes time," she said softly. But even she began to wonder if her daughters would ever find happiness. As Udo and Ugo sat together that night, their hearts heavy with sorrow, Ugo sighed. "Maybe love isn't meant for us," she said quietly. But Udo shook her head, her voice steady. "We will find someone. I know it." And so they waited once more, holding on to hope like a flickering flame in the wind. After Kelechi left, the house felt empty. Udo and Ugo tried to keep themselves busy, but their hearts longed for love. Then came Obina, the merchant. He arrived in the village with a bag full of goods and a mouthful of stories. Obina was lively, with eyes that sparkled like morning dew and a voice that could make even the saddest heart smile. He spoke of faraway lands, golden sunsets, and markets bustling with treasures. The villagers gathered around him, eager to hear his tales. When Obina met Udo and Ugo, his smile widened. "Two heads, twice the beauty," he said with a laugh. Udo and Ugo couldn't help but smile back. His charm was like honey. It drew everyone in. "He's wonderful," Udo said, her fair head tilting slightly. "I like him too," Ugo agreed, her dark eyes shining. For the first time, they both liked the same man. Mama Nika saw their excitement and prayed silently, "May this one bring them peace." The wedding was joyful, filled with laughter and music. The villagers whispered, "Maybe this time it will work." At first, it seemed their prayers were answered. Obina showered Udo and Ugo with gifts from his travels, beautiful fabrics, sparkling beads, and delicious spices. His stories filled their evenings with laughter, and his love seemed to bring light into their lives. But soon, the troubles began. Udo felt Obina spent too much time with Ugo. "He only loves you," she complained one night. "He hardly looks at me." "That's not true," Ugo snapped back. "You're just jealous because he likes my laughter." The arguments grew louder, like thunder rumbling before a storm. At first, Obina tried to keep the peace. "My beautiful wives," he said, "why do you fight? You are both precious to me." But his words couldn't calm the storm. The fights became worse, with Udo and Ugo blaming each other for every small thing. One evening, their anger boiled over, and they began hitting each other, their voices sharp like broken glass. Obina stood in the corner, his hands on his head. "Enough!" he shouted. "I cannot live like this. I love you both, but I cannot take this madness." After a year, Obina packed his bags and left, his once bright smile replaced by a heavy frown. The villagers shook their heads, their whispers turning into loud murmurs. It's clear now, they are cursed. No man can make them happy. Udo and Ugo stayed in their mother's hut, their hearts heavy with guilt and sorrow. Mama Neka tried to comfort them, but even her gentle words couldn't heal their pain. One fateful day, Udo and Ugo walked slowly along the dusty path, a water pot balanced on their shared head as they left for the river. Their hearts felt heavier than the pot they carried. When they reached the river, the sight of the calm water only made their sadness grow. They set down the pot and sat on the grassy bank, their two heads bowed low. Tears rolled down Udo's fair cheek and dripped onto Ugo's darker one. As they sat there, they noticed an old woman sitting on a smooth rock by the river. Her back was bent like an old tree, and her face was covered in wrinkles that seemed to tell 1,000 stories. But her eyes, they sparkled like stars. "Why are you crying, my children?" the old woman asked, her voice soft but strong. Udo and Ugo looked up, surprised. "Who is she?" Udo whispered. "I don't know," Ugo replied, wiping her tears. The old woman smiled gently. "Come closer," she said, patting the rock beside her. Something about her felt safe, like the warmth of a mother's embrace. The sisters got up and sat beside her. "Tell me, why are you crying?" the old woman asked again. The words spilled out like water from a broken pot. Udo and Ugo told her everything. The failed marriages, the villagers' harsh whispers, and the deep sadness they carried in their hearts. As they spoke, the old woman listened quietly, nodding now and then. When they finished, she looked at them with eyes full of understanding. "Your pain is heavy," she said, her voice like a soothing breeze. "But it is not without cause." "What do you mean?" Udo asked, her voice trembling. The old woman leaned closer. "Ask your mother what happened when she was pregnant with you," she said. "She has a secret." "A secret?" Ugo echoed, her eyes wide. The old woman nodded. "A truth that has been buried for too long. Go, my children. Speak to her." Before they could ask more, the old woman stood up. She walked to the river's edge and disappeared into the twilight, leaving only ripples on the water. Udo and Ugo sat there in silence, her words echoing in their minds. A secret? What could Mama Nika be hiding? They picked up their pot, filled it with water, and hurried home. They were determined to find out the truth. Udo and Ugo returned home, their faces wet with tears. They sat at Mama Nika's feet, their voices trembling. "Mama, we need to talk," Udo said, her voice trembling. "What is it, my children?" Mama Nika asked, setting the wooden spoon down. Ugo spoke quickly, her words rushing like the river. "We met an old woman by the river. She said you have a secret, something about when you were pregnant with us." Mama Nika froze. Her hands, wrinkled and strong, gripped the edge of her wrapper. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mama, please," Udo begged. "Tell us the truth. What happened when you were pregnant with us?" Mama Nika's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, staring at the fire as if searching for courage in its flames. "It's not something I ever wanted to talk about," she began. "But maybe it's time you knew." She took a deep breath, her voice heavy with sorrow. "When I was pregnant with you, there was a day the sun was so hot it felt like the earth itself was burning. I was walking back from the market, my throat dry as a desert. When I passed the river, I couldn't resist. I knew the tradition. Pregnant women are forbidden to go near the river during the hot afternoon. But I was so thirsty." Her voice broke, and she wiped her tears with the edge of her wrapper. "I bent down to drink, and that's when I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder. I looked up, and there she was, the river spirit. Her eyes were like deep pools, and her voice was like thunder. "You have broken the law," she said. "For this you will pay." Mama Nika's tears flowed freely now. "She cursed me. You are supposed to be twins, but her curse made you one. 2 heads, 1 body." The room fell silent. Udo and Ugo stared at their mother, their faces pale with shock. "Mama," Udo whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I was ashamed," Mama Nika said, tears streaming down her face. "I hoped the curse would not define your lives, but now I see it has." Udo and Ugo sat in stunned silence, their hearts heavy with this new knowledge. Finally, Ugo spoke. "We must go to the river. We must speak to the spirit." Udo and Ugo exchanged a glance. They knew what they had to do. Without another word, they turned and left the house, heading back to the river to find the old woman. When they reached the riverbank, the old woman was waiting, her figure silhouetted against the moonlight. "You know the truth now," she said. "Yes," Udo replied. "Mama told us everything. Can the curse be broken?" The old woman nodded. "It can," she said, "but it will require a great sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" Ugo asked, her voice trembling. "You will know when the time comes," the woman replied. "Go back to your village. Tell them what must be done. If they agree, the curse can be lifted. If not, you will remain as you are." Udo and Ugo looked at each other, fear and hope swirling in their eyes. They nodded, thanked the old woman, and turned back toward the village, carrying the weight of her words in their hearts. The path ahead was uncertain, but they were determined to face it together. The villagers gathered in the square after hearing Udo and Ugo's story. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do. The curse wasn't just the sisters' burden. It was now the villagers' responsibility. The old woman from the river appeared, her presence as commanding as the rising sun. She spoke with a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. To break the curse, the entire village must come together. For 7 days, offering must be made to the river spirit, food, oil, and animals. And Udo and Ugo must stay in the shrine by the river, fasting and praying. Only then will the curse be lifted. Though some grumbled about the cost, the villagers agreed. On the first day, they brought yams and palm oil. On the second day, chickens clucked as they were offered to the river. By the third day, goats bleated, and the aroma of incense filled the air. Meanwhile, Udo and Ugo stayed in the shrine, weak from hunger but strong in spirit. They knelt side by side, their prayers rising like smoke from a fire. "Please let this work," Udo whispered, her voice faint. "We'll endure anything," Ugo added, her head bowing low. Each day, the villagers returned with more offerings, their faces filled with hope. The air grew heavier as the days passed, and even the children, who didn't fully understand, prayed with their small hands clasped tightly. On the 7th day, the sky darkened. Thunder roared, and the river rose high, its waves crashing like an angry beast. The villagers watched in fear, their offerings trembling in their hands. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storm stopped. The river became calm, its surface smooth like glass. The old woman stepped forward. "Come out, my children," she called. The villagers held their breath as Udo and Ugo stepped out of the shrine. Gasps filled the air. They were no longer conjoined. Each had her own body. Udo stood on the left, fair and glowing, and Ugo stood on the right, her dark skin radiant. The villagers erupted in cheers. "The curse is broken!" they cried. "The river spirit has forgiven them." Udo and Ugo smiled, tears streaming down their faces. For the first time, they felt whole, free to live their lives as individuals. In the months that followed, Udo married a kind blacksmith, and Ugo found love with a gentle farmer. They both had children and lived happily. their bonnet sisters unbroken. The villagers too learned their lesson. From that day on, no pregnant woman dared to go to the river in the hot afternoon. The tale of Udo and Ugo became a story of hope, love, and the power of sacrifice. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye.